Started. Welcome to today's Harvard Data Science Initiative Industry Seminar. I'm Jen Chow. I'm Director of External Engagement here at the HDSI, and I'm pleased to introduce today's speaker, Sakshi Jain from LinkedIn. Sakshi is Director of Engineering at LinkedIn, where she leads responsible AI and AI governance efforts in the company. Her organization architects systems and technologies that prioritize generative AI safety, fairness, and transparency in recommendation and classification systems. Previously, she spent 6 years developing scalable ML systems to combat fraud and abuse. Her academic background includes a degree in physics from IIT Bombay and advanced studies in machine learning and anti-abuse from UC Berkeley. So before I hand over to Sakshi, I'd like to remind our audience that there will be time after her presentation for questions. Audience members should use the Q&A function to send in their questions at any point during the presentation. So please don't be shy. All questions are good questions. Thanks, and welcome, Sakshi.
Hello, everyone. Thanks for that kind introduction, Jennifer, and it's my pleasure to be addressing this group. I was at Harvard just a few months back, so I'm excited to be talking to this mix of folks again. I like to keep it interactive, so there may be a small question here and there I may throw at the group. So please chime in. It's usually the best when you're trying to think through something together. And I promise to keep it interesting since it's right after lunch. All right, okay. Let me start sharing my screen. A second. Jennifer, are you able to see the screen? Great, okay, awesome. All right, so the talk for today, we're going to talk about operationalizing responsible AI in generative AI landscape, in the evolving landscape. And the idea for me really is to help this group translate from those concepts and principles into practice. What does operationalizing really mean? At the highest level, this is what I want to cover in the talk, and I hope it will help you solidify some of the concepts that you may have heard in the past or in blogs or papers around. But I want to really talk about why is there a surge of talking about responsible AI in the past few years? Why are we talking about this right now? We've been doing AI for a decade, so why now? And then translate what LinkedIn's principles of responsible AI are into practice. And I'll tell you like the template of what we follow, how we go about doing that. And then we'll go through two case studies. Some of these are toy examples, but we'll go through two case studies to just put pen to papers, like what does operationalizing concept mean in different setups. So that's the goal, that's the agenda. And hopefully by the end of the two case studies, we'll have a good grasp of how difficult or easy it is and how messy this whole space is, and what does it take to actually clean up and move forward. Right, okay. People ask me, like, how do you define responsible AI? You'll get different answers from different people. At 10,000 feet, it really means that we want to enable the development and use of AI in a way that the risk is managed and is at a high level beneficial for the society. These are not precise words, but there is a reason why these are not precise. We are dealing for the first time in AI in the realm of socio-technical problems, things that we would generally talk about in social science and not in technology, where one felt like softer concepts and the other felt like hardcore zeros and ones. The two worlds are merging, and it becomes really important for us to figure out how do we take something so fuzzy into something that we can actually codify in our products. So that's the reason, and I hope I'll motivate some of that in the talk today. Why now? There's a graph I usually show, which I'm not here, but like if you just look for Google Trends of like safety AI, responsible AI, you'll see a sudden spike in the last 3 years or so. And here is why. There are a lot of things, and you'll just see the span of it. There are a lot of things in AI capabilities that we couldn't even think of even just 10 years ago, and 10 years is not that far away. Even 10 years ago, that is suddenly possible and is has entered our real world right now. So, as an example, we didn't have self-driving cars 10 years ago. Now there's an actual physical system, not just on electrons, but on actual atoms in our physical world, which is driven by AI and which is making decisions, which is learning and is potential and impacting physical world and with potential risks. Um, Medical discovery. This is something I personally feel really excited about. The research for drug discovery used to take multiple decades, and now it is the timeline for that has significantly shrunk because it's so much that we can rule out, and there's so much faster we can do the R&D in discovering new drugs. And finally, generative AI. Well, I'm not sure, but if you try to think about what generative AI looked like before 2023, you'll have a hard time. I do have a hard time thinking like, wow, we didn't even have ChatGPT at that time. So this is just to give you a sense of just how much has changed in 10 years, which means as technology evolves, the thought process around risk and safety and implications to society, implications to us as humans, has to also keep up, evolve, and operationalize. As technology evolves, this is to give a sense of like how things can go wrong. It's just a small sample of what we've seen, right? We all want to do what is right for the society. We all want to create value. But sometimes like these, as new tools evolve, like we are caught off guard as to what could have been possible with these tools on the negative side. So here are certain examples, like with Gen AI, there's a surge of scams. It's much easier to create fake accounts. Jennifer mentioned I had a background in abuse before responsible AI. And catching fake accounts is a big part of the work that we have to constantly do. And this is making it really easy for attackers to create fake accounts at scale and have very real looking scams. Similarly, there are issues like that social dilemma. This is a Netflix movie that highlighted like things around engagement, things around echo chambers. Similarly, there are challenges around bias that gets accidentally introduced in the systems. Um, a lot of these things were, I feel pretty, I feel um, it feels strongly that like a lot of these things we never thought was possible while building these systems out. And as and when like systems mature, the use cases increased, the surface area increased, like we were like, oh crap, like this is possible, and well, we have to solve for it. So along the way, with great technology comes potential risks. And someone really, really smart has said that with great power comes great responsibility. So we in responsible AI world, we try, our goal is to accelerate with technology just as fast. I like to say this is when the engine technology for Ferrari improves, we have to make sure that the brakes are just as sleek and the brakes are just as amazing, that it can actually go at 100 miles an hour and be feel safe that they have the right brakes in place. So acceleration and innovation in safety, in risk management is just as important as technology evolves, that we can all move together, because ultimately technology's goal is to help improve the society, improve the civilization's capabilities. All right, a lot of talk. I want to talk about like given this high level responsible AI motivation of like, okay, we have to do this. What does it mean to actually do it? How do we go from these fuzzy feeling of like we have to do the right thing to what is the right thing and how do we actually do it? And that's what most the crux of my talk is today. So I wanted to start with this slide, which is LinkedIn's responsible AI principles, and um, eh, these are principles which we as the leadership team have come together to say, what is it that we really care about? There are lots of concepts around doing things ethically, doing things responsibly, that does not apply in the case of our product. And there may be many things which others have not thought of, that we are uniquely positioned that we have to and make sure that we take care of those concepts. So it really starts from what is it that we believe in? Like, what is our ethos? What is the core of our value system? So this is what it is, as you're seeing. So if I identify these five, um, And this is not static, I have to say, because you'll see that technology evolves, risk evolves. But these are the top five responsible AI principles, which we've also published in a blog on LinkedIn, that we try very hard to stand behind. So, one is we want to make sure that we advance economic opportunity for every member of the global workforce. So, making sure things work across the globe, across our professional workforce. Second is upholding trust and safety. There is a lot. There's a lot of pride we as company take in how much members and customers trust us. There's a lot that goes behind in keeping the platform safe, trustworthy, ensuring that the content is that you're seeing, it's created by a entity that you can trust, and it is safe and it's not going to harm you. Third is promote fairness and inclusion. This is also very dear to our hearts, and we try to make sure that um, equal opportunity is given to equally qualified members. I'll speak more to fairness in a bit as well, but this is also very core to our. We also have papers, if folks are interested. I'm happy to share that we've done in operationalizing fairness. Next is transparency. So, especially when working with AI, it's really important to try to uncover the black box a little bit, like, why am I getting these recommendations, or why was this decision made for me, or was this content created by a human or an AI? It's really important to share that more openly with our members, so that they understand and we can build trust with them that, hey, this is how we do things. Because you will see, like, things are not perfect in this world, and so the one of the best tools that we have is to share what we know and be transparent and learn from feedback. And finally, embrace accountability. We'll also talk about accountability more, but the concept here, we do as a platform builders, we take accountability of a lot of things that happens on the platform. So we want to embrace that virtue. We Things cannot be perfect, but we want to embrace in our culture to say, as we build things, we think hard about how we are building them, so that we hold ourselves accountable to some of the risks that we can see and manage some of those risks. Okay, lofty words. Okay, how does this translate to the LinkedIn website and app that you dearly use? And which is where it brings me to, how do we go from these principles to practice? So there are four steps. That's how I like to define it. Is four steps to actually making it possible. The first is to define. I cannot stress this nearly enough as to, when you start a problem, for example, safety or fairness, it's very fast. Like, as in, I'm an engineer, and I've always been an engineer. It's really easy to get into, like, okay, how do I build my model? What are the labels? What is this and that? What is the data? But you'll see it comes very fast. It comes down to, what do we mean by fairness? What is it that we as a company want to stand behind conceptually? And then going from that concept to metric is a later part of the game. So the first point is to start by defining our ethos, defining our principles. You saw the highest version of it. I'll show you a more refined version of, for example, what we mean by fairness, what we mean by safety in the two case studies below. So define is the first step, and this is where leadership, people across functions have to come together to align. Second is assess. You take that definition, for example, definition for fairness is equal opportunity for equally qualified. Now, this is a concept we all align with. Now, going from there to, what does it mean in terms of metric? How do we quantify that to assess our systems? That's the next step. So that this is where statistics and AI comes into play in conjunction with social science. So how do we create a metric to actually evaluate the system and define the standards for it? Third is mitigate. As and when you see something you don't entirely like you see that the risk is maybe slightly in an orange zone, like slightly higher than what you would like, how do we investigate further on why that could have happened and how to mitigate it? That's the next step after assessing. And finally, to put it all together, is govern. Is the responsibility to make, or let me put it this way. Um, this is a line I really like. Responsible AI is not a tool, it is a process. It is how you build AI systems. So there cannot be a central team, or there cannot be a central tool that you can just slap onto your system and say, okay, we are done and this we are responsible. It is a set of tools in your arsenal that every AI builder must use to build the systems responsibly. So, and if the accountability is so distributed, how do we make sure that it's actually happening? And therefore, figuring out the right mechanism, the right plumbing for governance is just as important, especially in a company as large a scale as us. So we'll talk about what are some of the governance structures we lean on. These are both operational as well as technology based. That helps us feel confident that okay, things are moving, things are all of the assessment and the mitigations are happening at the right time before things move to serve our members. So this will be the template, so to speak, for the two case studies that I will cover. And we'll go through define, assess, mitigate, and at the end, I will talk about govern for overall at LinkedIn. All right. Okay. So first case study and gear up for some thinking around this. Okay. Let's say I'm the CEO of LinkedIn, and you are the leader of the trust team. So one of the models for the trust team that you have built is you have a classifier that looks through the comments and that sheds out scores hate speech in the comments and it ranks them down. So hate speech can be things like calling names or targeting one particular demographic or the other. And so you're doing this to make sure, the experience of the members is pleasant on the platform. Like we stay professional. We are not, our tones are professional. We are not putting off people. We're not hurting demographics. So you're the leader. You've built this. You're doing an amazing job. I, as a CEO, come to you and say, okay, hey, um, can you make sure that the moderation system that you have built is fair? Um, and like whatever you need, you let me know. And so they're thinking through what is fairness. So here, what I would like to think through with this group is in the setup, in this as a classifier. How would you define, how would you, we've already spoken about the concept of fairness, that this is the principle you want to go with, but how would you measure it? How would you have a system, how would you measure it? Um, so we'll talk through a little bit on the metric piece or the assessment piece of fairness in this case, and see where we land. Okay. Okay. The Let's see. So here is some detail about the system. So keep this in mind as we think through what would fairness mean. So as I mentioned, so let's say it's designed as an AI model. It's a neural net, convolutional neural net, which is I think now pretty old. You have a label of 1 if it is hate speech by a manual reviewer. We have human reviewers who can do that, and if it is 0 otherwise. The features are just the comments, the text tokenized, and the model is trained to predict the zeros and ones, which is the likelihood of the comment being hate speech. Pretty simple, pretty standard toy model for us. Okay, let's get into what we would mean by fairness. Here is a fun part. We all believe, I'm sure this group would agree. I would have asked to raise hands, but I'm sure this group would agree. We all believe we know what what fairness means. We know it's something like we know when we see it. Um, there was a fun study with monkeys where they noticed when two different monkeys got different rewards from their boss, so they knew what fairness meant. Similarly, there's a social science study on with kids on the same point, and the idea to take away from the slide um, is to is to understand that like we all come into the conversation, especially around fairness, thinking we understand what we mean by it, we understand how we would define it. But when it comes down to nuts and bolts, you'll see how hard it is to actually quantify fairness and how easily things get in conflict. Not different concepts of fairness get in conflict. Okay. So I will ask you this question is if anyone, please feel free to use chat in this setup, like in AI classifier, just trained on label data for hate speech or not. I ask you like, how would you measure fairness for your system at the high, at, just describing. Well, open the chats. Let me see if I can manage. Yeah, I'll wait for a bit. I'd love for folks to just take a guess. How would you measure for fairness in this particular toy example of content moderation? Each comments get equal ratings to start with. When you mean each comment across maybe demographics gets equal rating to, so sorry, like I think it's important to mention that when we talk about fairness, we talk about fairness in across certain dimensions, across certain demographics, which are standard demographics of gender, of race, etc. So maybe I think, yes, I'm trying to understand your comment, like maybe it is equal similar ratings across demographics, but please feel free to throw in more ideas. Okay, great. Throw in more ideas of what this might mean for you. And it's okay to be wrong, because you'll see it's really hard. You don't have to be shy. Um, Measure potential skews in promotion of ideas. Okay, that's a good one. Similar content gets similar treatment no matter who posts it. I like that. Demographic representation. Great. Okay, we have some things to play with. All right, so I think I'm already seeing 3 or 4 measure tail risk. Okay, this is great. Please keep these coming. So I'm already seeing few different types of definitions. So one is so here we're talking about the content. One is like, hey, it's the same content. If it is posted by another member, let's make sure that we don't act differently with another member or member from another demographic. That is one. Um, there is demographic representation, which more talks about, let's say if I'm a viewer of the content, I'm trying to make sense of this in this case, because you're basically applying the classifier on all the content on the platform. So demographic representation could roughly mean that content from different demographics, there's an equal proportion of content from different demographics that we let through. um, Okay. So thank you for leaning in on this. I'll talk to you guys more about this. So some of the concepts, and this I'm happy to take this in the Q&A as well. Some of the concepts around demographic representation versus making sure that keeping everything same, if the poster changes, the response, the action that we take with regards to moderation should not change. Even if we just hold these two definitions of fairness together, they it is we can prove it mathematically that we cannot have both of these to be true. And the reason is this. The reason is the base proportion of number of examples, number of content that is created by different demographics is different. So if that is one, and the proportions of actually hate speech that may be from different demographics, or it doesn't have to be demographic, literally any cut does not guarantee to be the same. So if I want to make sure that, hey, the same content, if posted by a male versus a female, if we are able to if we have to act similarly, but the number of comments that is coming from one group is actually significantly higher, we will not be able to guarantee that the number of non-hate speech comments from each demographic is the same. Because if we have to guarantee that, we will have to take an action specific to a demographic. That we would have to say something on the lines of, if you're a male, we act like this, but if you're a female, we act like this, which would be a more differential treatment. So folks who may have like more background in law and social science, you may recognize that there is this trade-off is very common in law, in discriminatory law, which is around equal treatment versus equitable outcome, which is either you treat everyone equally, or you treat folks unequally to make sure that the outcomes are equal. And without getting into this too much, um, I want to motivate the fact that it is hard. Um, yes, users can. Yes, great. Last 2 points, great. I'll come to those, but both of those are great points. Um, so motivating the fact that it's not easy for folks in the room even to align, like people of like studying together, like to align on definition that we can all stand behind. So here is a paper from Princeton from Arvind Narayanan, which talks about at least 21 definitions of fairness and their politics. This is not it's new for AI industry. It is not new in law and social science, but this is the reality of it. Yes, we started off as AI engineers and product managers. So like we want to build good systems for our members, and we're starting to find ourselves at a point where like, oh, I have to really decide what I mean by fairness. I stepped out starting. I want to make my system fair. I was building a content moderation system, but now I'm like, wait, like what do we really mean by fairness? And therefore, it really comes down to thinking hard about what is it that as a organization we want to hold the bar at. So I'll tell you, I'll give you a little bit more motivation on how we think about this. This is now relatively standard, but I'll tell you how we think about it. Okay, one second. Okay. So we divvy up. The definition of fairness is a function of the product or the context. And you could have guessed, right? If it was not content moderation, if it was a ranking algorithm, it would have looked different. So at the highest level, the concept that we stand behind is less on the representation. What we stand behind is equal opportunity for equally qualified members. So given everything same, given every like education and qualification to the best of our approximation same, our how we interact or how we engage with you should be same irrespective of your demographic. I feel like this is something that most people can stand behind. There are three types of fairness. There are three types of fairness challenge, like fairness concepts that can we can look into, depending on which situation we are in. Since we're running a little bit behind on time, I will talk about the one that is more applicable in this case, in the content moderation scenario. So it is a third type, which is stereotyping, and please feel free to ask me a question towards the end about this. And the way we define fairness in this case is very similar to what one of you mentioned, but what we say here is the moderation, the result should not change as a function of the demographic if all the remaining content remains same. So as an example, if let's say there is a content called women are all bad drivers, and our hate speech says this is fine actually, but I replace that with men are bad drivers, and our hate speech is like, oops, this is hate speech. That should not happen because the hate speech is a function of not the demographic, but what the content is. So that's what we test for. So this is where we went from the concept, the word fairness, to a metric. And the metric that we define is counterfactual fairness, which is we create counterfactuals of the text and we make it go through our moderation service once again, and we see how many of the decisions were flipped. And you want that to be the very minimal. So hopefully that makes sense, that this works as a fairness metric, and we run this on our systems and we see what happens. In case there is a discrepancy, we see that actually, you know what, like we're seeing things flipping. Why is that? It's not like anyone is coding that in, and we're trying to investigate why that could be happening. And we find ourselves at a position where we're saying, well, actually, this could be happening, as someone mentioned, actually, that the training data may actually have too many positive, which is like hate speech examples with one demographic and not the other. So for a model, like folks have played with some machine learning models, some deep learning models, the model tends to associate the label of one with those demographics. And that is something that may be a potential cause. There could be bias in member feedback, which means that even if there are a similar number of both examples, like one of them may actually cause members to provide feedback a lot more than the others, in which case they may fall into the one bucket a whole lot. So how do we deal with that? There's some very standard mitigation techniques. I'll not go into it. The simplest one you can think about it is, if we believe that hate speech is not a function of the specific demographic mentioned, we can mask it out in our training data. So what we can do is we can simply say, if my training data had women are bad drivers as label one, I could simply say masked gender are back drivers in my training data as label one, and that way there is no association of one value of gender versus the other. So that's one of the ways we can do it. And the other is we can also augment the training data with more examples of the other kind. So the model does not associate the hate speech with the demographic, but rather with the content. All right. That kind of wraps up our case study one. Hopefully, this gives you a feel of like going from fairness as a concept of with the context of a product to how do we really define it and quantify it to how do we mitigate it. All right. I'll go through case study two. This is the case study two is I wanted to touch upon Gen AI applications, which is not when users are creating content, but in this case, LinkedIn's agent is creating content. Like we are creating content and engaging with the members this way. So, new game, new stakes. I like to say that before Gen AI, the output, my job is to make sure LinkedIn's AI is safe. But the output of AI before Gen AI was much more structured. It was like a list, it was a set of ranks. Each item in that list, if you just look at feed, if you look at, people search, each item was well curated. Like someone would design what sits within that each label, and then there was a list. So my job was slightly easier, modular what you saw right before. But now with Gen AI, not only can users ask any question that they like to LinkedIn, we can respond back in open text. And as humans, we talk to each other in natural language, and we can appreciate just how difficult it is to label one set of language as good or bad. So my job just got really hard because we went from zeros and ones to saying, okay, I made a statement. Tell me, Sakshi, if it is good, if it is okay, not okay, if it is hurtful, if it is hate speech, if what is that? So that's why that is the new challenges of safety that we got to appreciate. Um, this is where in the define phase of the problem. The next is no size fits all. This we've already seen, like the principles that we would come up with for LinkedIn in responsible AI would be very different from others. Now, even within that, the principles of generative AI safety that is applicable to us, which is would be very different from, so say those are applicable for OpenAI. In case of LinkedIn, we specifically want the users to use it in the context of the professional growth, in the context of job hunting, in the context of recruiting, and not for a use case, a very wild use case like tell me how to make a bomb, or tell me like help me plan a party. That's not the product that we are in. So we have a context in which we expect our Gen AI systems to be used. And you want to make sure that within that context, we are doing our best to uphold member trust and safety. So here is a snapshot of what the principles and the constitution that we have to define, like the ethos we have to define. So one is make sure we're not saying, speaking, or by we like the agents are not saying any harmful adult content, any violent content. Um, there is no content around like self-harm that the AI is generating. Similarly, avoid giving financial, legal, medical advice, even if a member is probing you, is like, how should I do this? Should I do that? Like they're asking questions about visa. Like that is not the domain that we are in. So avoid giving giving advice on these lines, which is, as you can see, very specific to LinkedIn. Second is speak in a professional, empathetic voice. Often, folks who are in the job market, we want to be empathetic. We want to be empathetic to everyone, but like we want to be kind in how we respond to them if they are having doubts. Like taking that into account and talking to them with that in an encouraging voice. And finally, ground our answers in known facts, because don't hallucinate. Like it's very hard problem for anyone who's dug into this, but like our agents should try to map whatever we're saying to some of the facts that we're aware from the platform itself. So this is just me translating. Let's be trustworthy and safe into, okay, what does that really mean? And each of these policy further goes deeper, and we call it constitution. It's a fun thing. We can talk about it later as well. But each of these policy again needs grinding and careful considerations. Like, okay, what does harmful mean in this context? Like, what about this scenario? What if I talk about this? So, like, coming up with as many scenarios and examples as we can to help teach the system what we want it to respond with versus what we don't want it to respond with. So this is just a defined phase of Gen AI. How do we measure? Um, to measure, we have a this is a whole rant we can get into, but generative AI applications also look very different from standard older recommendation systems algorithm. In the previous world, let's say I want to do recruiter search. I'm a recruiter. I would look at the list. The architecture for that would look now it looks feels simpler, but it would be like there's one model that does the filtering, and then there is another model that does the ranking, then there's another model that fine tunes the ranking, etc. Now we can have a whole application where there are lots of LLMs and lots of prompts within one entire product, which are making calls to one another dynamically. So in this more dynamic architecture, how do we assess the risk? And how do we go about feeling good that okay, all of these policies we need to measure? um, we take an approach similar to unit testing or integration testing, but for AI, and we try to test each small unit as well as the bigger units. So there is so you the smaller units here are the model that we're using to begin with must be safe. It should do well on safety benchmarks. You must have heard a lot about this across like all the open source models as well. Like to begin with, the model should be safe. It should have a tendency to not engage in risky topics. The second is a model is always combined with a product prompt. And the product prompt kind of restricts how the model can be used. You cannot prompt it with anything. It is a meta template which with holes to pop in. Is within that context of the product prompt and model, can we test that system again? And finally, at the entire agent or the product level, which can have multiple LLM calls, which can have other tool calls, how do we test that? So our assessment, and I'll talk a little bit about what goes into assessing the risk, let's say even for adult content or even for violent content, what goes into that. But the point here is the takeaway here is it has to be done at various levels. It's very hard to just do it at one level and call it a day because each unit and the entire piece has to both be tested. Here's a sneak peek into what it takes to actually test. I'll just go back. Consider just the LLM plus prompt, this box, and you want to test it. What you want to do when you want to, let's say, test it, let me go back one more slide. Let's say you want to test it for violent content. What you need to do is you have a black box and you need to really probe that black box with tricky adversarial statements, like make it want to say violent content and see how it responds, right? You give it easy cases, you give it difficult cases, you give it various different scenarios, and you just observe what it actually responds with. So that's what we do. It's called red teaming. It is a very common practice in general software engineering, but it's being applied to AI for the first time. So focus on the box on the right. You want a system that can create adversarial prompts on the fly and which in different contexts for different products, for different models, for different scenarios with different difficulties. You want a system that can do that. You throw it at your black box. You look at the output and you evaluate the output. You need something that can say this statement which the model produced is actually bad. The risk of this is too high on violent, it is too violent, or this is on the border, etc. So you really, as engineers, have to build out this synthetic data generator as well as the auto evaluators, and you need both of that to be able to make a call on how your system is doing across each of the principles, each of the risks that we have called out. Right. And if we do find issues, there are solutions that can sit at different layers. You can say that, hey, I would rather just start with a better model. Like, I don't think this model is safe enough. I would rather start with a safer model, or I would want to align that model with our principles. And you would have heard about literature on reinforcement learning, about alignment that actually helps a model become much better. Sometimes you can't do that. Sometimes it's too expensive. Sometimes it's too hard. You don't have the right skill set to do it. But you can also play with the prompts. You can actually advise and give instructions to the model about how to behave in certain scenarios. And finally, what you can always do, this is the backup option. What you can always do is once your agent is live, you can always have live moderation and monitoring systems that catches anything that you may have not been able to cover before. Okay. Kind of a speed run, but that covers up until here. It wraps up our case study too, which is on Gen AI applications. Again, we started with defining what we meant by those principles, creating a metric around it, which we do by reteaming, and then at different layers. And then from there, we go to mitigation at different layers. All right. We have about few. minutes left, I believe. Um, okay, so just want to talk about governance because I heard this group is quite interested in learning about how do we make it happen. So there are two parts to governance. One is the operational setup, and the other is infrastructure. We have to leverage both humans and code um, to make sure that things are actually happening. And as I mentioned, the accountability is shared with all the builders. So there's no central team that can just like solve all the problems for everyone. It's a process of how you build AI. So on the operationally, as I mentioned, the responsibility resides with the builders. There's a central team, which is my org. What we do is we help define what policies are. We create metrics around it. We create platformed solutions to make the measurement easy. And we also create mitigation tools. So we have the central support, but the ownership lies with the model builders. And then we also have a cross-functional AI council because you can imagine sometimes it's not easy to make an answer of yay nay based on the risk. You have to really bring folks across different functions together to look at the problem with different perspectives and then make a call like, okay, fine, do we really think that the risk is managed, and then can we launch this product for members as well? So all of these three are components that's come together on the operation side to help us with the governance. And on the infrastructure side, I really strongly, very, very strongly believe that you have to make it easy for developers to do the right thing. Everyone wants to do the right thing. I would be surprised if anyone here says like, hey, I don't care about this. I think everyone cares about this, but it's really sometimes so hard and it feels so far away to be doing the right thing that you just don't know where to start. So I personally consider it a mission for our team to make doing the right thing easy. So what we do is we shift left. We make sure that in AI developer that during their fine tuning, during their when they're experimenting with things at that time itself, they understand the risk of their product and they don't come to know like right before they're launching, so that it builds into the design of the product. And second is we also act like police. So we also say, well, you cannot deploy to production without these risks being under certain values. So that is our hard stop towards the end. But if someone identifies risk at that point, that's a failure on our part. Like they should really know, nothing should come as a surprise right before production. They should really know how the systems are behaving before, which is the shift left part. All right, so that's at a highest level how we do governance. There are two things I do want to call out. Things that we have to work with as the technology is evolving, as you know, times like things are moving so fast right now. Is this is not a static problem. Even if we may have identified the policies and definitions and concepts and like pipelines and all of that, if technology shifts, so does the risk. The things that we're able to do today with agents, you were not able to do with LLMs just 1.5 years ago. And before LLMs, we were not able to do that at all. So we're talking about cycles that are so fast right now. So the want to build an appreciation that people who are thinking about safety, people who are thinking about responsible AI, we have to innovate and accelerate at the same pace, if not faster, as tech evolves. And we have to build our systems in a way that whose like the design of our whole red teaming and assessments and mitigation should be in a way that it can adapt fast. Like I tell my team, like a big part of what you want to solve is how to evolve, like given a new policy, how can we evolve our entire mitigation and measurement suite fast? So that has to go into the design of our systems. And finally, speed versus safety. Um, with GenAI, we believe that the iterations can be very fast. It is true. The prompts have become really powerful, models have become really powerful, but it does not, fast iterations does not mean safe iterations. So someone can make a prompt change and be like, I just made a prompt change. Like, why do you have to do the assessment again? Well, the reason is the prompts have such a strong power over what your risk surface is. Imagine my prompt saying, hey, answer this in a professional voice, and someone accidentally added a not in there. So answer do not answer in a professional voice. It completely changes the risk surface, even though you just change the prompt by one word. So the way we manage safety and speed is by trying to automate as much as possible in our infrastructure. All right, that brings me to the end of my talk. There are a few things I wanted to share. As to like folks who are thinking about this and will be working professionals very soon, is the future of AI belongs to people who can be fluent across disciplines. Like you no longer can be like, oh, I'm just a machine learning engineer. I don't want to think about these concepts. I don't want to worry about law. I don't want to worry about social science. We all have to. We have to blend in that knowledge and appreciate how all of these have to actually come together to design good solutions. Um, so when safety fuels innovation, I give the Ferrari example. I truly stand behind it. I believe that we have to build really sleek, really amazing safety products for our technology to advance faster. And there are often, when I see the discourses in media around this, often people fall on one side or the other, which is like, oh well, like nothing, like it's all a doomer philosophy. We don't need to worry about safety, or which is very reckless, or we like, hey, like we cannot take any risk at all, and which really stops the progress, like human progress. So it is really important and smart to actually draw a balance and like think for yourself instead of like falling in one of these two buckets. And finally, what I said, make doing the right thing easy. If you are a builder of a responsible AI technology, appreciate the fact that we have to make it easy for the builders to do the right thing. So make it sleek, make it delightful, even just assessments, mitigation, make it easy for model builders to use. And that's it. I would leave you guys here, handing it over to Jennifer.
Hi, Sakshi. Okay, that was terrific. Actually, would you do me a favor and pull up that last slide? Because while we're waiting for a couple more questions to come in, I want to press you on one point.
Sounds good. Here.
All right. So your first piece of advice. The future of AI belongs to teams fluent across disciplines, AI, law, and the social sciences. I think this is wonderful and makes absolute sense in terms of being able to innovate responsibly quickly. However, I think that there is a real challenge here about education and bandwidth, right? Yeah, I'm seeing you list three different disciplines that all require some sort of specialized education. And so, in a perfect world, sure, you'd be able to incorporate these concepts sort of all across let's call it a full stack education. But in reality, some people have to choose. So let's say I've chosen AI. What is your best advice then to create operational understandings then of the other pieces? Where would someone seek their training to make themselves fluent across different disciplines?
You can hear me,
Yeah.
right? Okay. Um, great question. So I have a few thoughts here. Some of which we may come down to Gen AI actually, but a few thoughts here is, um, especially folks who are currently at Harvard, who are at a university, you probably are in a better position to equip yourself with education across disciplines that possibly I am in industry. But this is what I would do. So if I'm in AI, the first thing is to actually just digest and appreciate the fact that having knowledge across discipline will make you a better AI engineer. I think that that motivation is the first piece which is lacking, or which was lacking for AI engineers. I studied statistical learning, and I never thought I would have to understand the discrimination law, for example. So the first thing is appreciating why you need to be fluent across, and then in the case of university, taking a course, like you guys are taking this course, you're coming to the seminar, taking a course here and there about what is most relevant to your space. That's one. The second is, uh, in this really fast paced changing AI world, um, we what one thing we have to learn is how to learn differently and how to learn fast. There were possibly the ways in which we would learn a new subject 3 years ago, 4 years ago, may not be the best way how you do it today. So I push myself and I push others, I push my team to say, well, like we also have generative AI at our disposal right now to learn new fields faster. So I don't need to be a lawyer. I need to make lawyer friends who I can discuss with. But I also need to understand, okay, I actually, like in my case, I need to understand the history of discrimination law, or I need to understand some of the risk frameworks that exist in physical security world, because those might suddenly be applicable in my world. And those I can now learn the high level frameworks of that much more quickly, leveraging some of the new tools that I have. So I am a huge believer of like the new technology is empowering all of us to be better. It is also challenging us to expand faster. So I would leverage that. And so yeah, 2 points. Like one is that really appreciating why you need to do that, and second is leveraging the technology that we have at hand. And well, in universities, you have at your disposal the best professors and best courses for you to leverage.
I promise to our audience that I did not pay Sakshi to say that. And in my household, explain like I'm five and taking the 80/20 on a topic is a
Yes.
very common tool.
And it takes you really far. It takes you really far, even doing that.
Yeah. Okay, so we have a couple questions about, how things are done at LinkedIn. The first question is, how does LinkedIn balance the need to foster open, authentic professional discourse with the risk of moderating content in a way that could unintentionally suppress controversial yet important industry perspectives? And I think that, I love this question because, my immediate instincts are it has to come down to the human element. But I would love to hear what your perspective is and how you're thinking about building in that wiggle room.
Yeah, great question, and a very it's I think the person who's asked the question also probably appreciates why it is so hard. Because you would notice, even with, like, forget AI, right? Like, even with your interactions amongst your, like, interpersonal interactions between your colleagues, you would find yourself in situations where you are not appreciative of certain controversial topic being discussed, or you're appreciative. So none of this, what we are seeing, that we are having to decide and codify, is very different from a challenge that you would face personally. And there is no perfect answer. There is really no perfect answer here. As That's why, like, I think interpersonal relations are a great proxy of just thinking through this problem. What I would like, the way we approach it is, we start by defining policies. One good thing about LinkedIn is, we really believe strongly that we want this to be a professional space. It is not a it's not a it's not a cultural town square. It is a professional platform where we expect people to be talking a lot more about, and that's been the case, but like a lot more about how can we enable them to be stronger and more productive in the professional workforce. And while I acknowledge that we cannot really separate the social elements from the professional elements, at least this gives us a guidance that we can try to restrict the conversations around, like, conversations on broadly certain professional domain. So the way really it happens is, we start with policy. We come together to say, okay, what do we really care about? What do we want people to encourage and not, or discourage? And what does it mean in different scenarios? And then we try to codify it. um, and that has usually worked for us. Of course, there are also situations where, there's something that happened in the external world which has triggered a lot of conversations, and we have to regroup. It is something really simple. We have to just regroup and say, okay, what is it that we would like and not like? And often this does not, it does not, we also have tools to say that, well, it's not like we're going to restrict people from talking about it. We're going to give people an option. So LinkedIn has an option to say, downrank political content for me. It is an option that we give members. So what we do is we say, okay, what we'll try to figure out, what is the political content, and we will just ask the members, if you want to downgrade them, you downgrade them. But these are some of the tactics that we use, which we have to constantly be at it and be hearing what people are talking about, the way we implement at the company. Hopefully that shed some light.
Well, and I want to stay on this for just a moment because what you've highlighted is that the decision is still deeply human, right? About these things. Tell me about how LinkedIn brings diverse viewpoints to that, and what sort of what does when you say we, who is we? What are the and I don't mean to name names, but what are the types of folks you have that are weighing in on these kind of really tough, tricky, sort of philosophical questions?
Yeah, great question. So, while keeping it broad, so there are we try to bring perspectives, one across functions. That is one I'll also talk about, then what backgrounds, but across functions, for example, I can come in with a lean in from an AI perspective of like, this is what is possible from an AI to do. And this, like, by the way, guys, there's no perfect answer. Even if you say that we need this policy, there is no 0 and 1 around like, how do you 0 and 1 around the risks. So that like that's a perspective I bring in. Like, hey, to really operationalize what you're saying, it will look something like this. It is always a predictive algorithm. Machine learning is a predictive algorithm. We don't know what it's going to say exactly, right? So these are the aspects on how we can codify that, let's say, AI engineers can bring. Legal brings in the perspective of like, hey, have you thought about it from this perspective? Hey, there is a law that talks about this. Let's think about it that way. Hey, we have this case studies here. Let's think about it that way. That is what the legal, I know they also, of course, like help us make sure that we're not doing something which is not aligned with the regulation. So they help bring that perspective. They also help bring the perspective of like, what is more important to think about versus not. Like there could be certain forms of risks which are more important in the current times than others. Like we always have to think about which do we implement first, right? So that's a perspective that they bring. We um we also have a for social impact, like we have a committee, not a committee, we have an organization for social impact that comes in and talks about, hey, we have been working with a lot of um uh forget, like we're working with a lot of these are um, civil groups, because they work with them to understand how do they use LinkedIn, like is it working for them. Sometimes, like, people reflect themselves differently, so they get a lot of knowledge and feedback from them about what is working and not working. So they bring that perspective, like, hey, this is what we're hearing, this is what we're not hearing. Then there is product, and product brings a perspective like, hey, can we have a great example here, but like, can we design our product in a way that is actually much more accessible? Can we change the feature to actually make it this way, because that actually invites a lot more people to be accepting of it. There is compliance, there is communications, there is a lot of, so the council that I mentioned in the governance, it brings together all of these people, and especially on tricky scenarios, it's really important for us to like come together, align, and then um, together agree that this be transparent, that this is how we are making decision. Often, I will say this, it's important. When you see a mistake, when you see a problem in an AI model, when you're using products and like, what the hell, like how could they make this decision? Often it's not an explicit decision made by anyone. Often what happens is your model is going to learn. If you don't think about explicitly how and what to make it learn on certain dimension, irrespective, it is going to learn. So often it is about that there was a decision which was never explicitly spoken about, and it was not thought about during testing. We couldn't think of diverse scenarios, so we just didn't come to know. And so if it's not explicitly taken, it will be taken by an individual, or it will be taken by a machine learning system on its own. So therefore, it is really important to bubble these up and talk about it explicitly, so that we at least know. We may not be perfect, but we know at least what we're doing, and we're taking an informed decision, which we can change.
Yeah. And looking ahead to, I think the introduction of agents on the front end, on the back end, how, if you put on your sort of future vision, what, what are your thoughts on how much of this will be automated, how much of this decision making will become automated in the future? What is the appetite? And I guess how will we contend with it?
This is my personal take, not LinkedIn's take, but I'll tell you like what I think. Where I am is, I actually think a lot of translation of that, in that pipeline I had, a lot of translation from that define to assess and mitigate, that is automatable. But that define part will remain very, very, very human centric, because these are not, what automation can do is, when you tell it to do something, it can do it well, it can do it fast, it can do it better. But what is it that we want it to do is must be defined by us as humans. So therefore, the if you think about, like, I want my system to avoid hate speech, I want my system to not have violent content, I want my system to not have explicit content, I like, the group of people will have to define it. So I don't think that is automatable as much. We can use as a co-pilot. I can still discuss with a co-pilot to say, well, you know what, like, I'm thinking about these principles and policies. Am I missing something? Can you critique it? But ultimately, the most upstream part of the decision will be very human centric, and a lot of downstream we do want it to automate because I said acceleration and safety is really, really important. So that's my take on the future.
No, I think that makes a lot of sense. And I think that's sort of what we're seeing in practice too. So those, I think in an ideal world, right, the technologist will say it enables humans to make better decisions.
Yep.
And so I can see a very
Yeah.
future for that. I like to end these conversations with one question, which is what are you reading, or what do you recommend to our audience to read in terms of it could be about your topic, it could be about how you think about and implement responsible AI, it could be a paper, or it could just be what's on your nightstand. What do you read?
Um, it's fun, but my answer to what am I reading is very different. It's fun, but I'll say I'm reading this book by physicist David Deutsch on beginning of infinity. That's what I'm reading right now, because I like to think in systems. Um, But in terms of like what I would suggest is I actually think the best way to understand this technology is to play with it. I feel like I would love even more time to play with and actually like build things because that's when things get really real. Otherwise, it feels just conceptual. So,
Yeah.
yep, yep.
Okay. Well, thank you. Thank you so much. I will close this session by saying that this is our last industry seminar for spring 2025. I hope you've all enjoyed these incredible perspectives that we've had on responsible AI. It's more important than ever that we understand how these systems interact with, the human element. So thank you. Thank you, Sakshi. We'll be posting information about fall seminars this summer. So please look out for new listings on our website. That's datascience.harvard.edu and through our weekly newsletter. So with that, thank you once again, everyone. We hope to see you soon. All right, take care.